You slowed down, you stopped forcing, and the relief you expected never came. And what makes that confusing is that slowing down wasn't avoidance. It was intentional. You didn't do this impulsively. You didn't suddenly give up or check out. You made a conscious decision to stop pushing so hard. You rested where you used to rush. You paused where you used to override yourself. You loosened your grip because you believed that tension was the problem. And for a moment, it probably felt right. You felt a little more space in your days, a little less pressure in your chest, a sense that maybe things didn't have to be wrestled into place. That initial softening matters. It wasn't imaginary. Your system actually responded to the absence of constant demand. There may have even been a brief sense of relief that surprised you. A feeling like, okay, this is what people were talking about. That's why this part feels so disorienting. Because slowing down is supposed to bring relief. That's the promise, that's the deal we're given. So when the relief never fully arrives, when the background tension stays, it doesn't feel like impatience. It feels like something quietly didn't work the way it was supposed to. If you're honest, there's probably a subtle sentence running underneath this experience. I did what I was supposed to do. You didn't ignore your body. You didn't keep grinding past the warning signs. You listened. You took your foot off the gas not because you were weak, but because you were trying to be responsible. You told yourself this was maturity, that this was what growth looked like now. Less force, more trust. And that matters because it means this wasn't avoidance disguised as rest. It was a sincere attempt to do things differently. And that's what makes this uncomfortable, because now the question isn't, why am I pushing too hard? It's why didn't easing up actually fix this? There's a strong belief floating through our culture right now that tension is the root problem. That if you're anxious, overwhelmed, stuck, or burnt out, it's because you're trying too hard. So the solution becomes obvious. Slow down. Rest more. Stop forcing. That message is everywhere. It's in how people talk about healing. It's in how success stories are framed. It's in the way rest is positioned as the missing piece. It's even wrapped in language about self-respect and self-worth, as if pressure itself is the enemy. And for many people, that advice genuinely helps, at least at first. It creates contrast. It interrupts overdrive. It gives the nervous system a break from constant demand. It shows you what life feels like without pressure constantly leaning on you. But what doesn't get talked about as much is what happens after that initial release. What happens when you slow down, and the deeper unease is still there? What happens when rest doesn't resolve the underlying sense of being stuck? What happens when you're calmer, but not clearer? That's the part that's rarely named, because slowing down feels like wisdom. It feels mature. It feels like you're finally doing the healthy thing. So when it doesn't lead to the shift you expected, it's hard to know how to interpret that without turning it into self-judgment. You might start wondering if you misunderstood the instruction, if you didn't rest deeply enough, if you're still secretly forcing without realizing it. You might even feel guilty for wanting movement again, as if desire itself means you're doing it wrong, especially when you see other people slow down and seem to unlock something. They rest, and suddenly clarity appears. They step back and life rearranges. Watching that happen can quietly make you question yourself, even if you don't consciously compare. Here's the uncomfortable possibility. What if slowing down isn't wrong, but it also isn't sufficient on its own? What if removing pressure doesn't automatically create movement? What if easing up stops the strain, but doesn't actually tell your system what comes next? This is where things get subtle. Slowing down reduces activation. It lowers noise. It gives you room to breathe. But quiet alone doesn't reorganize direction. Silence doesn't automatically become clarity. You can be calm and still feel stalled. You can be rested and still feel unsatisfied. You can be regulated enough to function, but not oriented enough to move. And from the inside, that can feel deeply confusing, because your body is no longer screaming, yet something still isn't settling. You might feel it as a low-grade restlessness, or a dull pressure behind the sternum, or a sense of waiting without knowing what you're waiting for. Not panic, not urgency, just unresolved. This doesn't mean slowing down failed. It means slowing down did exactly what it's designed to do, and no more. It released resistance, it removed strain, but it didn't supply direction. Slowing down is a release mechanism. It helps you stop fighting yourself. It tells your system that it doesn't have to brace anymore. But it doesn't automatically generate clarity, direction, or forward movement. It creates space. But it doesn't decide what fills that space. And that's where people often get stuck, especially when you look around and see others who seem to slow down and suddenly everything clicks. They take a break and a new path appears. They stop forcing and life responds. Seeing that can quietly mess with your head. Because you did the same thing. You followed the advice, you trusted the process, and somehow you're still here. Still functional, still showing up, still doing what needs to be done. You're paying your bills, you're keeping commitments, you're handling responsibilities. Nothing is actively falling apart, which makes the lack of movement harder to justify. You're not in crisis, you're not spiraling, you're just paused in a way that doesn't feel complete. That's often when people start to wonder if they slowed down too much, or if they misunderstood what letting go was supposed to mean. They start oscillating between rest and effort, never quite trusting either one. They relax, then feel uneasy. They push, then feel tired. But the deeper issue usually isn't that you rested wrong. It's that slowing down removed resistance without creating orientation. And without orientation, the system stays suspended. You're no longer pushing against life, but you're not being pulled forward either. So the question isn't, why didn't I slow down enough? The real question is, what did slowing down make room for? And what did it not? Because relief and movement are not the same thing. Calm is not direction. Rest is not alignment. Sometimes slowing down simply reveals that something deeper needs to be addressed. Something that pressure was masking. When you were forcing, motion distracted you from the absence of clarity. When you stopped forcing, that absence became visible. That realization can feel uncomfortable because it means rest wasn't the final step. It was a doorway. This is why this phase feels so strange. You're not doing anything wrong. You're not resisting. You're not pushing. You're noticing that the absence of pressure alone doesn't automatically produce a sense of yes. And that noticing matters. Because until that distinction is clear, many people swing back and forth, pushing when they're tired, resting when they're frustrated, never quite understanding why neither extreme resolves the underlying stuckness. They keep hoping one more adjustment will finally do it. One more release, one more pause. Just pause here for a second. Not to fix anything, not to decide what's next, just to notice how this lands in your body. If this resonates, there's nothing you need to force into clarity right now. Just recognize this. You weren't wrong to slow down. But slowing down alone was never meant to complete the process. It was meant to stop the fight, not define the direction. And seeing that, without turning it into another self-improvement project, is where a different kind of movement can begin to take shape. This doesn't resolve all at once. It unfolds